Good morning, everyone. Uh, this is Tuesday, August 7th, 2018, and this is the weekly meeting of Kubernetes Sig Docs. I had to undergo a momentary cellular transformation to become not myself, but Kubernetes Sig Doc lead in order to record this meeting. As you can tell, I have done it. Let's start by asking if there are any new contributors here, folks who are attending for the first time. Hi, Svetlana.
Hi. So I work for Rackspace with the Kubernetes team at Rackspace, and recently team wanted to contribute more to the upstream Kubernetes, and there was opportunity to attend
Awesome.
whatever interest group. So I decided to join and listen. So today I'm just listening, basically.
Great. Well, welcome. I used to work at Rackspace too, so we can catch up on Slack and see who we know in common.
Sure.
Any other folks who are new? Welcome back, Dominic. Welcome back, Dhananjay. I think that is it for novelty. So as an update, I've got some ongoing health stuff and I'm only going to be semi-available. I need to pull back my hours significantly until we figure out what's going on and get it dealt with. So I will be around, but I won't be sort of around as a default. The best way to get a hold of me if you need my attention for something is to send me a direct message on Slack. Hopefully that will change, and you can just message me any old time, or I'll start showing up randomly in comment threads again. But for now, if you want to make sure that I see something, it's best to assume that I don't see it unless you mention me into the thread. All right, we have two things to revisit from last week before we move back. We've got two quick things to talk about from last week. I don't see Zach Arnold here, so let's skip the 1.12 update. So let's see, Andrew, do you want to talk about the Google search problem with indexing yesterday?
Yeah, so we started getting a lot of issues and notices that the search results for Kubernetes.io weren't coming up in Google search. And I traced it back to a couple changes that happened. And actually, these changes happened maybe about a month ago, but the search results only started changing slowly. So the issue was the way it was set up, the way I set it up originally was for, by default, all of the, for all of the branches when they're deployed to have the header no index tag in there, and then switch that off only for the master branch. But there's a series of changes where I think they didn't know what they were changing, and so it got pulled into the header for all of the branches, including master. So I reverted those changes and set it back, and then I think I had some notes in the netlify.toml file to say what those things were, but I think maybe they weren't descriptive enough, so I have a PR in there to explicitly say do not remove this, and a little bit more information on what it's for.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to apologize for that because I approved one of those PRs, the one that Luke submitted, and when I looked at that, the changes to no indexing just flew right past me. I didn't even realize.
Well, I didn't either. I think when I saw that PR, it didn't occur to me that this is what would happen. And because it was split across two different ones, there's also a change from BEP. And then, so it kind of just, got through the cracks.
So are you getting enough attention on the PR to update netlify.toml If you need more review on it, I would be happy to. If you want to assign me into it, I'd be happy to take a look.
Okay, sure. I mean, it's a really short one. It's just making sure there's like comments in there that you
Even better.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for fixing that. Yeah, I saw the flood of PRs come in, and it was awesome that you were on that so quickly. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The search results may take a little while for them to start showing up in Google search again.
Right. Yeah, they didn't de-index overnight, and
yeah,
it will take them time to re-index.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. How do we actually know that it's fixed? Because, like, how long does it take? Do we know?
I can try to force a re-index, but it's not immediate. Like, I can go into the Search Console and put in a request for it to re-index the site, but I still think it would take maybe like a week or so. So
I was just surprised that it didn't happen really quickly because, like, for instance, the 1.4 site, when you guys shut that down last week, it went off the search results really fast. So I guess it's a different sort of a thing.
Yeah, because that was shut down and is like probably 404 now. Whereas when we just put the no index header stuff, the site was still there and there were no 404s. It's just like it couldn't be indexed anymore, so it gradually declined. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Misty, do you want to? I know we were going to follow up on this from last week for maintenance releases by number that need manual bumping. Have you had a chance to think about what a more ideal solution might look like?
I haven't, and I'm not sure that I'm gonna come up with a solution all by myself. I don't really know enough about what's available in Hugo, and I haven't had time to dig down. I just reiterate that the situation that we have now is really brittle, and I'm not necessarily sure what to do about it. I'm still not convinced that putting .x on everything is the right way to go, because that forces users to change something every single time. So yeah, I don't have a solution.
Okay.
Maybe we can all come up with something together.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like, honestly, like something to approach like SIG architecture with, maybe, is like release naming policy.
Well, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is we have some places in the docs where people have to specify a Kubernetes point version.
Right.
We don't ever go and update the docs every time there's a point release. There are point releases all the time, including in older branches. And we don't update that, even though like front matter exists about what the current point release is, but it's not a rotational duty or anything like that to go and update those.
Sure.
And it's a manual process in each branch anyway. And
sorry, I'm just coming back. My brain is finally catching up from a week ago. Is it that, am I remembering correctly that we were thinking about trying to replace each one of those instances with a variable?
That was one option. I mean, we have the variables now. We just don't keep them up to date, and we're not using the variables in those places.
I see. So is it something that like a contractor could like throw a few hours at and at least get us to where we ostensibly claim to be right now?
Oh yeah, pretty easily, I think. Then the matter is keeping it up to date. So we don't currently assign anybody as the release meister or anything like that for those point releases, because there's not a lot of work on our part. But it's also interesting that I'm not sure that we update the release notes in our docs, even though we have the release notes. We have a copy of the release notes for the major releases, or minor releases, I guess is the right name for them. But I don't believe that we go back and add release notes for point releases into the docs. So that's also a little bit of a weird thing, because we sort of train people that release notes are going to be there. And then as far as I know, like I didn't update them for 1.11.1.
Right.
So we just have some unevenness in the processes, and we probably need to figure out what the desired end state is, and then we can make a plan to get there. And I don't know if we need to do that today.
No, I think this is a longer term issue to solve, but I do think I agree with you. I think that we do need to solve it. I think our release process could definitely be better, especially for like you point out, the consistency of release note expectations and content. Okay, I'm going to take a look and see if I can. I'll be at Write the Docs Cincinnati, and that's prime hiring territory for contractors. So I'm going to see if I can wrangle a couple of folks to get to the work that we all sort of look at and say, gosh, that needs to get done, and throw some contractors at it.
Specifically for release notes, I really like, as an end user, and when I've been maintaining doc sets before also, it's fairly easy to have like one release notes page for like 1.11, and then that release notes page gets the 1.11.0 release notes, and then as there's 1.11.1, those get added on the top.
Sure.
And then you keep adding on the top, and you have a table of contents. That way it's obvious what's the latest. And people
sure. We can talk specifics about like what that could actually look like when we have the resources to put against it.
Yeah.
All right. I'm bringing up how to import content from internationalization repos into K website again, because it's a thing that we haven't solved yet. The more I look at Subtree, the more I agree it's kind of a nightmare. And I don't know that we need to have the kind of commit history associated, or the commit history associations that one gets with Subtree. It could be possible that we could just open a giant PR initially to import all of the contents of like content / ZH or KO or JA, just sort of one big dump initially, and then set up webhooks to make that work. But I don't know if that kind of a webhook chain is possible between repos like that. We are getting to the point though where we've got maybe like 3 months before this needs to all work. So I don't know, Andrew, I know that you've had thoughts, but I don't know if this is something that you want to tackle or if we want to like try and get a small working group with multiple people on it. I don't know. What are your preferences there?
Yeah, I mean, we might want to get a working group because I am not sure what the right answer is either.
Okay. I will start a working group for automation. All right. All right, so let's go. Let's move on to fundamental modeling concepts part 2.
Okay. So based on the feedback from last week, because I think Tom and some other people asked about, instead of doing pod, what if we did more of like a high level architecture of Kubernetes? So Dominic was sort of noodling around on that, and he has sort of a presentation that will kind of give us an idea of what that might look like.
Awesome. Thank you for coming back, Dominic.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I like the word noodling around. So let me share the presentation real quick. Need to get acquainted here with Zoom. I think that should do it. You can see my screen, correct? Wonderful. So as Andrew already mentioned last time, when we were talking about modeling the pod, there were also some requests about, well, can we actually start on a higher level and talk about Kubernetes, what it is, what it does, and on the highest level, how it does it. So as Andrew said, I was noodling around, and nothing you're going to see here is definite. It's just the first step. And so that you guys can see what approach we're taking, what direction we're going. So this is a first try for a definition. Kubernetes as a container orchestration engine designed to host containerized applications. That raises numerous questions right off the bat. That is, what is a container orchestration engine? What does it actually mean to host, and what are containerized applications? So then you basically go deeper down the rabbit hole and look for a definition of a container orchestration engine. As I said, very first, very rough step, where you say, well, a container orchestration engine makes sure that for each container in an application, there is most one node, so that this node hosts this container. Now then the question, and the goal obviously is that the number of containers that is not hosted on a node is minimized. So obviously you cannot always guarantee that you can host all containers, since there are resource restrictions, but that is basically the overall target of the orchestration engine. Then the question is, what does it actually mean to host a container, right? And so here you come up with the idea that for each container there is at most one node that hosts this container, and eventually the state of the container is terminated. Now, eventually is a tricky business, because the definition in temporal logic states this does not need to ever come, but once it comes, it holds forever true. So this actually accommodates the common Kubernetes workloads quite nicely. Some applications forever running. For example, if you have web applications, some applications actually are intended to terminate if you talk about batches. And then lastly, containerized applications. What are containerized applications? In this simple scenario, containerized application is nothing more but a set of containers, which also actually addresses Kubernetes quite nicely, because for Kubernetes, the container is the smallest unit of concern. Anything deeper down, Kubernetes does not really care about. It's actually opaque. Kubernetes cannot further look into it. So that basically comes to a definition where an application is a set of containers, and the containers are hosted on at most one node. In the situation in this slide is very iffy, however, I still want to throw it in there. In the context of Kubernetes, then you break it down to application specifications that will eventually lead to desired containers that are matched by current containers that are hosted on the individual nodes. And you can also well see the areas of concern for the individual components of Kubernetes. Controllers are mostly concerned with application specifications and the desired containers. The scheduler is concerned to actually assign a node for a desired container to turn it into a current container. And the kubelets are the ones running the containers. Now, as I said, this is a very, very first initial step, has multiple issues associated with it. For example, the notion of current state and desired state is a notion that actually deserves to be further investigated. Also, it appears to be the case that Kubernetes, the individual controllers and the scheduler of Kubernetes actually work in the control loop fashion, comparing desired state to current state. The kubelets, however, do not. So for a kubelet, the kubelets are basically just operating on a large process table, like an operating system process table, where each pod is a process. But since pods are ephemeral, pods may go away, and the kubelets do not further care about that, because otherwise you would have to have the notion that the desired state also affects, the desired state always affects the current state, but in that case, you would also have the notion that the current state affects the desired state, because then eventually a pod has to be removed from the desired state when it terminates in the current state. Otherwise, you would doom the pod to run forever. However, this notion is completely counterproductive. So it seems that there is a hard stop at the scheduler where we talk about desired state and current state. And the kubelet operates on a simple process table. And once a pod dies, the process in the process table is removed. So as I said, there are multiple issues with this presentation, but this is basically the direction that we want to take. So the takeaway here is that we try to nail down definitions, even of sub-concepts, like, for example, container orchestration engine, like host, and use these definitions to then define what Kubernetes is, specify what Kubernetes does, and FMC then comes into play for the highest level of how does Kubernetes actually do it.
Thank you very much. Thoughts and feedback. I have some, but I would like to hold it for others.
I have thoughts. So looking at this, so two things popped in my mind. The way you did the definitions was something I was very, very comfortable with, but I do have a master's degree in mathematics. I was a little concerned that for people like me, that was very elegant and a good fit and very intuitive. For a lot of the folks who are not very strong and math is their first language, those definitions could easily be also done in non-mathematical sentences, and the concepts were simple enough that I think people could grasp them in non-mathematical sentences. So that gave me a little bit of worry. And then on this chart, this was good, the one that you're showing now, but what I noticed is, I don't know if you're missing some entity relationships or what, but you really had to verbally describe to me what the kubelet does and what the scheduler does. And I'm not able to get those from the diagram without the added verbal description that you gave. So, the suggestion would be if you're going to try and use this modeling approach to really capture the essence of Kubernetes, somehow there's got to be, either through entity relationships or something else, a way that makes clear what you were able to tell us verbally. Hey, the kubelet's responsible for this, and the scheduler's responsible for that. Those are the things, Zach, that popped in my head.
Let me address both of these comments, if you don't mind. So, number one, if you have a math degree, you probably got me outpaced there already. Yeah. But I do agree that the mathematical formulas are by no means sufficient to actually be put in front of end users. So my approach usually when I use these mathematical definitions is to force myself and then also the collaborators to actually agree on a model. And then this model has to be put into words. Absolutely correct. So for example, this one I fairly much like because you can actually read it like a sentence. Yep. Say for each container there is at most one node where this container is part of this node. However, I do use the mathematical formulas in order to force myself to be precise. And I also use a formal modeling tool, Alloy, that uses first order logic and set theory in order to specify these models and see if my thinking actually has any inconsistencies. Once these inconsistencies are ironed out in a mathematical sound model, then I go ahead and put these back into words. But for me, these are very important for us to collaborate on, that we have a very strict, very specific definition of what we're actually talking about.
Yeah, and if I could interject, like I think of it as part of the process, right? This isn't the output that we're giving to the users, but we're creating a model, and what's more rigorous of a model than mathematics? So once we have a fine model, then it's easier for all of us, including the tech writers, to be on the same page and then craft like the words around it to convey to the end user. Yes,
we need the wordsmith. Very true.
Yeah, I do like that distinction, Andrew. I appreciate that.
Now, for what it's worth, my math is now not years old, but decades old. And I still found this very approachable for precisely the reasons that Dominic explained, that getting it simple and right and having a really, really clear, succinct definition that we all agree on. I think this is really a fantastic approach.
Thank you. It will enable us to actually strictly define what are synonyms. Somebody says an application is being executed. Somebody says an application is being hosted. Now, we actually do have the possibility to have these two terms be two distinct concepts, but we can also easily now define synonyms by saying that the predicate being hosted strictly equals the predicate being executed, or we can specify where the differences actually lie. Now, when we come to the second statement, once again, absolutely true. None of this, what we have in this presentation, shows yet how Kubernetes does anything or what it does. It only shows relations between the individual concepts, diving into the agents and the events and actions of the individual agents or individual components of Kubernetes, is then basically the first level and first output that we need to derive from the definitions and then, of course, from the implementation of Kubernetes.
Yeah. Yeah, my simple point is if you look where you've got the line for kubelet and then you look where you've got the line for scheduler, I couldn't tell from this diagram what exactly you were trying to get across with regards to, you know, ownership or responsibilities or what have you by the way those lines work. I simply thought, you know, there's going to be a need, a way to annotate this to give you more information to really express what I think you said verbally, eloquently. But if I didn't have you saying it verbally, that was the part I had a hard time following.
Yes,
I don't know.
yeah.
Jennifer, are you able to look at this diagram and get a feel for, you know, what scheduler has responsible and kubelet is responsible, or did you need the verbal description as well?
I needed the verbal description as well, and I have been, not really recently, but within the last month to 6 weeks, digging into kubelet stuff. And the kubelet is part of the control plane, but it's also a different kind of critter. And you don't see that at all. Here it looks like it's the same kind of critter as the controller and the scheduler, where critter is not well defined, I agree. But
sure.
And I mean, that's one of the things that makes this stuff hard to describe, right? So, and I thought that Dominic's, like you, Brad, I thought that Dominic's explanation was immensely useful, sort of the expanded definition.
So
but yeah.
Would it help if, I mean, as Dominic has clearly pointed to us, that this is a first draft, that this is a work in progress. Is there enough here that we could give this kind of feedback in a pull request, for example? Are we satisfied that the direction that Dominic is headed with what he has is going to be for the fundamental nature and direction of the project? Without it, are we satisfied with it? And could we offer this kind of feedback at the PR comment level? Or do we need to revisit the fundamental nature of the thing itself? Because it sounds to me like we've got...
Also, my proposal would be to create a working group so that by the time it gets to the PR process, it's already mostly kind of refined.
Sure.
Yeah. And you have to understand, some of us find this, you know, personally enjoyable to see, right? So please don't take my comments as harsh criticism and, you know, pulling out the Kleenex box. And, you know, I think there's a lot of potential here. I think you see me making these comments because I really like this stuff. I really like it, and I think it'll be interesting to see where he goes when it comes to things like deployments and stateful sets.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be happy to participate in a working group. When he gives these presentations, I just leave really enjoying them. So don't take the criticism too hard, please. I'm just trying to help make sure we get the most out of it, if that makes sense.
Actually, let me jump onto that. That is what I would like to accomplish in a first step, right? That is that we start to share a mental model, right? And then also, as Andrew said, when we bring in the wordsmith, they share a mental model with us. And from that, we derive an end user description, right? This is nothing you can just throw in front of an end user.
No, that's a fair approach and a very good one, the way both you and Andrew explained, hey, this is the process to get us to the end user writing stuff so that we're always on the same page. I think we've all been in meetings where you can tell everybody is thinking about the problem completely different, and there's that frustration. And so getting a model to unify everybody up front is really cool.
So to make sure we're kind of moving along, the action items I see are that once everyone agrees this is kind of a project we want to do, then Dominic would need to do this as a contractor. So he and the CNCF, I guess via Zach, would need to come up with a contract, and then we should form a working group so that we can just have a weekly or whatever cadence to work on this stuff.
Agreed. I'm in favor of it. I think it's an awesome idea. Dominic, if you will contact me by email, let me put my email in chat really quick.
I can also give it to him.
Then we can get the ball rolling. But yes, let's proceed.
And we have a lot on the agenda today.
Yeah, we do. All right, so thank you for coming back, Dominic. Yes, let's proceed, and now let's move on.
Thank you.
Let's see, Dhananjay, you have a presentation for cluster operator docs.
Yes, that's right. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Perfect. So I made a little presentation. Yep. So the idea of the docs, this is the first time I'm doing one of these little presentations, so it might go wrong. But the idea is to sort of bring out something that I found while using Kubernetes. I've been using Kubernetes for about 3 years now, and talk to a lot of folks in the community. And this is just what we perceive as some of the flaws in the Kubernetes documentation. It's really good to get started in all of that. But as cluster operators, as people who maintain these systems, what are the kind of challenges we face when we look at Kubernetes as this upstream platform that we all use? And what the docs sort of do focus on and do a really good job of is how do you get started, right? They give you examples and they're pretty verbose in terms of defining stuff like pods and objects and all of that. But when you start actually running this, what you try and do is you set up a POC, you start running your workloads out there, and then silently you run into this whole mess of things that actually is involved in running Kubernetes in production. So I put out an example here, which is like I set up the cluster and I have a bunch of things that the docs talk about. And the expectation that the documentation sets to a cluster operator, for instance, is you simply need to run this application and it will be highly available. If a node goes down, kubelet will detect it and pods will migrate to a different node. And one of the questions that then comes up is Kubernetes silently dies on that node, right? And when you start digging into these things, you find that you have to use stuff like node operators or node problem detectors to figure out if something else is broken on the node. You need metric and other kind of probes sitting on the node to actually detect these flaws in the infrastructure. And to get to that point, you need to access a lot of other tools, say like Prometheus or Fluent or Grafana and use all these tools as an operator to debug and pinpoint problems. And to get to that point itself takes a lot of time for a bulk of the users. And it takes a lot of reading around. Like the community has built a lot of these really cool tools. And we find them eventually, but the discovery part is sort of not being aided, right? The other thing is there are these great tools, which some of them are a part of the CNCF, like Prometheus and Fluent. But if you actually look at the tasks documentation out here, it is sort of fallen out of maintenance. And when you go into the details of it, for example, if I just go to something like monitoring cluster health, right? Monitoring node health. It talks about a bunch of things that do exist. Play with Kubernetes, there are a few limitations, and it talks about what to do in an operator-specific environment. Like, yes, set up GCE and you'll have everything in Stackdriver. So this is sort of out here. And then I need to go Google around and figure out, okay, so what do I really use if I'm not on GCE or if I'm running a different flavor of Kubernetes? And what has also happened, it's a good thing and a bad thing for Kubernetes, is it's like Node.js, so you have a lot of different tools doing the same thing. And there's no real way that, as a person, Kubernetes itself might be intimidating when I walk in, but as an operator, it's even more intimidating. What tool do I pick, right? And one good example of this is, at least in the documentation of volumes in Kubernetes, we sort of explain what volumes is, and then we go to different types of volumes where you've listed everything that are community and sort of built by proprietary systems, right? And people can actually click on each one of these things and figure out what are their options and what they sort of advise. So this really helps me in making a more informed choice while picking my entire stack. And one more thing is the previous examples like node problem detector, we say, yes, Kubernetes point update, so the next version fixes it. But for a lot of operators, doing that version upgrade may not be possible because of a very complex matrix of dependencies or how stuff is running or how it's being set up. And as the community grows, you're going to have more of these problems. I think one point I missed out of here is I did notice this. This was really, like, when I found this link, I found it really helpful. Where you have these different parts, and I went to the cluster operator part out here, and I clicked on the links in this, and this has sort of, again, fallen out of use. So if I want to actually see what do I do, how do I define quotas or whatever else, I'll find that, but that does not sort of give me the story of an operator from an operator perspective. So one good place to start learning, and what I thought I would do is see what the competitors are doing, right? And by competitors, these are 3 or 4 firms which work in the Kubernetes domain, are very, very active contributors